Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations Built on Lies. Eldridge Williamson stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the Chicago skyline bleed orange in the dying light. At 38, he commanded respect in the real estate development world. A self-made man who'd clawed his way from a working-class neighborhood to owning a portfolio worth $50 million. His calloused hands, remnants of his construction days, drummed against the mahogany desk as he reviewed blueprints for his latest project. The door opened without a knock. Only one person had that privilege. Working late again, Courtney Williamson glided in, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood. At 34, she possessed the kind of beauty that opened doors and emptied wallets. Blonde hair always perfectly styled, blue eyes that could melt steel when she wanted something. She'd been Courtney Cunningham when they met 6 years ago at a charity gala, a marketing executive for a boutique firm. "Someone has to pay for your shopping trips," Eldridge replied without looking up, though his tone held no malice. It was their usual banter. Courtney perched on the edge of his desk, her red dress riding up slightly. "Speaking of which, I put a deposit down on that lakefront cottage in Wisconsin, the one we looked at last month." Eldridge finally met her eyes. "I thought we agreed to wait until the Riverside project closes." "But Michelle said," she caught herself, color draining from her cheeks. "Michelle said what?" Eldridge's voice remained steady, but something cold flickered behind his dark eyes. "Michelle Pittman, from the bank. He mentioned that lakefront properties are appreciating faster than expected." The lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. Eldridge knew Michelle Pittman, 36 years old, senior loan officer at Chicago First National, and the kind of man who wore $1,000 suits to hide his insecurities. More importantly, Eldridge knew Michelle had been handling Courtney's personal account for the past 8 months, ever since she'd insisted on financial independence. "Right," Eldridge said, returning to his blueprints. "We'll talk about it later." Courtney kissed his cheek, her perfume lingering as she left. The same perfume she'd been wearing more frequently lately, something expensive and unfamiliar. That night, Eldridge lay awake beside his sleeping wife, staring at the ceiling of their Gold Coast penthouse. The apartment he'd bought with his first major deal, the one he'd surprised her with on their second anniversary. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Once. Twice. 3 times. She stirred but didn't wake. At 2:17 a.m., Eldridge made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, he called Jonah Riggs. Jonah operated in the shadows of Chicago's business world, a private investigator whose services came with premium prices and ironclad discretion. They'd worked together before when Eldridge needed background checks on potential business partners. "I need you to look into my wife," Eldridge said without preamble when they met at a diner on the South Side. Jonah, a lean man with prematurely gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, didn't even blink. "How deep?" "Everything. Phone records, credit cards, where she goes, who she sees." Eldridge slid an envelope across the table. "Money's no object." "Timeline, 2 weeks." Jonah pocketed the envelope. "You sure you want to know what I might find?" Eldridge's jaw tightened. "I'm sure." Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. 2 weeks later, Jonah delivered a manila folder that would shatter Eldridge's world. The photographs were damning. Courtney and Michelle in various locations across the city. A lunch at Le Bernardin that lasted 3 hours. Hands intertwined as they walked through Lincoln Park. A kiss outside the Palmer House Hotel that left no room for interpretation. But it was the timeline that truly cut deep. The affair had started 14 months ago, 2 weeks after Eldridge had surprised Courtney with a pearl necklace for their 4th wedding anniversary. "There's more," Jonas said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "She's pregnant." Eldridge's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. "What?" 8 weeks. I have copies of her medical records from Northwestern." Jonah slid another sheet across the table. The timing. Eldridge studied the dates. 8 weeks ago, he'd been in Vancouver for 2 weeks, finalizing the purchase of a hotel chain. Courtney had claimed she was visiting her sister in Portland. Where was she really? Pittman's cabin in Lake Geneva. I have photos. The folder contained a detailed timeline of deception. Business trips that were romantic getaways, charity events that were cover stories, and financial records showing cash withdrawals that funded their affair. But what emerged from Jonah's investigation went deeper than adultery. Michelle Pittman wasn't just a loan officer. He came from old Chicago money, the kind that bought influence and expected deference. His grandfather had been a federal judge, his father a city councilman. Michelle saw himself as nobility, and men like Eldridge as temporary inconveniences. He's been bragging, Jonah continued. My source at the bank says Pittman calls you the blue-collar pretender. Claims he's going to get everything you've built. Eldridge closed the folder. Anything else? Your father-in-law knows. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Edgar Williamson, the man who'd welcomed Eldridge into the family, who'd stood as best man at their wedding, who'd taught him to play chess on Sunday afternoons. Edgar knew his daughter was destroying their marriage and had said nothing. How long has he known? At least 6 months. There's a bank record of him co-signing a loan for Pittman's business expansion. They've been planning something. Eldridge walked out of that diner a different man. The boy who believed in fairness and second chances died in a booth on the South Side. What emerged was something harder, colder, a man who understood that mercy was a luxury he could no longer afford. That evening, Courtney greeted him with unusual enthusiasm, wearing the pearl necklace he'd given her for their anniversary. I have wonderful news, she said, her eyes bright with deception. Oh, I'm pregnant. She watched his face carefully, gauging his reaction. Eldridge smiled, the same smile he used in business negotiations when he held all the cards. That's incredible news. He kissed her gently, tasting lies on her lips. We should celebrate. As they sat in their favorite restaurant, Courtney spoke animatedly about baby names and nursery themes. Eldridge nodded and smiled, already calculating his next moves. In the reflection of the restaurant window, he caught sight of Michelle Pittman at a corner table, watching them with undisguised hatred. Let him watch, Eldridge thought. Soon, there would be so much more to see. Chapter 3. The Opening Gambit. Divorce papers were filed quietly on a Tuesday morning in November. Eldridge's attorney, Sherman Robles, was a shark in an expensive suit, the kind of lawyer who viewed court battles as blood sport. She'll fight for everything, Sherman warned during their strategy session. The penthouse, the business assets, alimony. With the pregnancy, a judge might be sympathetic. Let her try, Eldridge replied. I want this done fast and clean. No custody battles, no extended proceedings. Give her whatever she asks for. Sherman's eyebrows rose. That's unusual. Most men in your position fight tooth and nail. Most men don't know what I know. Courtney's reaction was theatrical. She collapsed in their living room, tears streaming down her perfect cheeks. How could you do this to us? To our baby. The baby isn't mine, Eldridge said simply. The color drained from her face. What are you talking about? I know about Michelle. I know about Lake Geneva. I know about everything. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. The question is, do you want to do this the easy way or the hard way? Courtney's tears dried instantly, replaced by something cold and calculating. You can't prove anything. Eldridge pulled out his phone and played a recording. Her voice filled the room, crystal clear. Eldridge is so stupid. He actually thinks the baby is his. Michelle, you're brilliant for suggesting I stay married until the divorce settlement. We'll get millions. The recording continued for several more damning minutes. I have hours of these, Eldridge said, along with photos, financial records, and witness statements. Your boyfriend isn't as careful as he thinks. Courtney's mask finally slipped, revealing the ugly truth beneath. You bastard. You think you're so clever? You have no idea what you're dealing with. Michelle's family has connections you can't imagine. We'll destroy you. You're welcome to try. The divorce proceedings moved with unprecedented speed. Courtney, realizing the recordings would destroy her in court, accepted a settlement that seemed generous but contained carefully crafted language that would prove crucial later. She kept the lakefront cottage, valued at $800,000, received $2 million in cash, and retained rights to their shared business investments. What she didn't realize was that Eldridge had structured the settlement to leave her exposed to future financial obligations. Meanwhile, Edgar Williamson remained silent, continuing their chess games as if nothing had changed. During their final game before the divorce was finalized, Edgar made an unexpected move. "You know, I've always thought of you as the son I never had," he said, advancing his queen. "I know." Eldridge moved his knight, setting up a trap Edgar couldn't see. Courtney made mistakes. We all make mistakes. Some mistakes can't be forgiven. Eldridge's tone remained conversational. Edgar leaned back in his chair. "She's still my daughter. Blood is thicker than water." "Blood," Eldridge repeated thoughtfully. "Checkmate." Edgar stared at the board in confusion. He'd been 2 moves away from victory, and somehow Eldridge had turned the game completely around. "I don't understand. How did you?" "You weren't paying attention to the pieces you couldn't see," Eldridge said, standing. "Thanks for teaching me chess, Edgar. The lessons were more valuable than you know." On the day the divorce was finalized, Eldridge stood alone in his attorney's office, signing the papers that legally severed his connection to Courtney. But legal documents were just paper. The real game was about to begin. That afternoon, he placed a call to Dorian Dawson, a real estate developer who specialized in luxury properties. "I want to buy a specific apartment building," Eldridge said. "Price is no object." The building in question was a converted warehouse in River North, the same building where Michelle Pittman had been secretly paying rent on a private apartment for the past year. The apartment he used for his encounters with Courtney and God knows who else. "I can have the papers drawn up by Friday," Dorian confirmed. "Make it Thursday," Eldridge said. "And Dorian? I want every rental agreement in that building transferred to my personal management company. Every single one." By Thursday evening, Eldridge owned the building and had legal control over every lease agreement. Michelle Pittman would discover this fact in 30 days, when his first eviction notice arrived. But that was just the opening move. Chapter 4: The Baby Shower Gambit. 4 months later, the invitation arrived on cream-colored cardstock with elegant script. "You're invited to celebrate baby Williamson Pittman." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Courtney had kept his name for the settlement benefits, but publicly flaunted her relationship with Michelle. The baby shower was held at Edgar and Louise Williamson's estate in Winnetka, a sprawling Tudor mansion that had hosted 3 generations of family celebrations. Eldridge arrived precisely on time, carrying a modest gift bag and wearing his most disarming smile. The guest list read like a who's who of Chicago society. Courtney held court in the center of the living room, her hand resting on her 7-month belly, accepting congratulations and gifts with practiced grace. Michelle stood beside her like a conquering hero, his arm possessively around her waist. "Eldridge!" Louise Williamson rushed to greet him, her voice overly bright with nervous energy. "I'm so glad you came. This shows such maturity." "I wouldn't miss it," Eldridge replied, kissing her cheek. "Family is family." The afternoon proceeded with typical baby shower activities, gift opening, games, and polite conversation that carefully avoided mentioning the obvious tensions. Eldridge mingled easily, accepting congratulations on his gracious handling of the situation and deflecting questions about his future plans. It was during the gift opening ceremony that Edgar made his move. "Before we continue," Edgar announced, commanding the room's attention, "there's a special gift from all of us." He produced a large frame covered by silk cloth, something to help Courtney and Michelle start their new life together. With theatrical flourish, he pulled away the cloth to reveal a framed property deed. "A gift from all of us," Edgar repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Your new home." Courtney gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The gathering erupted in applause and congratulations. Michelle beamed with pride, accepting handshakes and backslaps from the other men. Eldridge moved closer to examine the deed, his expression curious but calm. The document was genuine, a transfer of ownership for a luxury apartment in Lincoln Park, valued at $1.2 million. But as his eyes scanned the legal description, something cold settled in his stomach. The address was familiar. Too familiar. It was the apartment he'd purchased 3 years ago as an investment property. The apartment he'd paid off in full, with his own money, using funds from his first major development deal. The apartment he'd bought before his marriage to Courtney, which legally made it his separate property. Edgar leaned in close, his voice low enough that only Eldridge could hear. You have 30 days to vacate. The words hit like a physical blow. Eldridge stared at his father-in-law, the man who'd taught him chess, who'd shared whiskey and war stories, who'd welcomed him into the family with open arms. The betrayal was complete. But Eldridge's face remained serene, his smile never wavering. One day is enough, he said quietly. The party continued around them, but Eldridge barely heard the laughter and conversation. His mind was already working, calculating, planning. By the time he left the estate that evening, he'd made 17 phone calls and set in motion a chain of events that would reshape everything. At 5:47 a.m. the next morning, a convoy of removal trucks pulled up to the Lincoln Park apartment building. The crew chief, a burly man named Roger Sherman who specialized in rapid property clearing, checked his clipboard one final time before giving the signal. Strip it clean, he told his team. Everything that's not nailed down, and half the stuff that is. They worked with military precision. Custom cabinets that had cost $30,000 to install, gone. Italian marble countertops, carefully removed and loaded onto trucks. Hardwood flooring that Eldridge had personally selected, pulled up board by board. Light fixtures, bathroom fixtures, the high-end washer and dryer from the utility room. Everything that could be legally removed as Eldridge's personal property disappeared into the trucks. By noon, the apartment was stripped to bare walls and concrete floors. The crew even took the custom window treatments and the imported tiles from the bathrooms. The legal grounds were solid. As the original purchaser and title holder, Eldridge had the right to remove any improvements he'd personally installed. The property deed Edgar had transferred was legitimate, but it only included the basic structure, not the $150,000 in upgrades that had made it a luxury residence. At 6:41 p.m., Louise Williamson's text arrived. Is this a joke? Eldridge smiled as he typed his response. Not yet, but tomorrow's delivery might be. He was sitting in his temporary downtown apartment, surrounded by boxes and planning documents. The view wasn't as nice as the penthouse he'd given up in the divorce, but it served his purposes. On the coffee table lay blueprints, legal documents, and a shipping manifest that would arrive at Edgar and Louise's estate the following morning. What he'd arranged for delivery would make the apartment stripping look like a warm-up act. Chapter 5. The Delivery. At 8:15 a.m., Edgar Williamson was enjoying his morning coffee when the first truck arrived. He watched through the bay window as uniformed workers began unloading what appeared to be construction materials. The delivery slip was addressed to him personally. By 8:30, the front yard of the Winnetka estate was filled with the contents of the stripped Lincoln Park apartment. Not just filled, artfully arranged. The marble countertops formed a perfect semicircle around the fountain. The hardwood flooring was stacked in neat pyramids on the manicured lawn. The custom cabinets created a makeshift outdoor kitchen beside the rose garden that Louise had tended for 20 years. But Eldridge hadn't stopped there. A second truck arrived carrying a team of workers who began assembling something that made Edgar's blood run cold. A fully functional construction site trailer, complete with portable toilets, a cement mixer, and industrial scaffolding that now towered over the estate's carefully manicured landscape. The third truck delivered the piece de resistance, a 50-foot construction crane that they were legally permitted to install because, according to the building permits Eldridge had filed, the estate was now designated as an active construction zone. What the hell is this? Edgar demanded when the crew chief approached with a clipboard. Construction staging area, the man replied, consulting his paperwork. Says here you're doing a major renovation. Permits are all in order. Edgar snatched the documents. The permits were legitimate, bearing the official stamps of the city planning department. But the project description made no sense. Demolition and reconstruction of detached garage and guest house. Timeline, 6 to 8 months. I never authorized any construction, Edgar protested. Don't know about that, sir. I just deliver what I'm told to deliver. The crew chief pointed to a signature on the bottom of the permit application. That's your signature, right? Edgar stared at the signature. It was his handwriting, but he'd never signed any such document. Except the memory came flooding back. 3 months ago, Michel had brought a stack of papers for him to sign. Loan documents, he'd said, for the business expansion. Edgar had been rushing to a golf appointment and had signed without reading carefully. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from his next-door neighbor, Lee Fernandez, a prominent attorney who'd lived in Winnetka for 30 years. Edgar, what in God's name is happening over there? There's a crane in your front yard. Before Edgar could respond, Louise came running from the house, her face pale with shock. The neighbors are calling. Mrs. Chun from the Homeowners Association is on her way over. Edgar, what have you done? What he'd done was trust the wrong people. By 10 a.m., the estate looked like a war zone. The construction equipment dominated the landscape, effectively blocking access to the garage and making the property unusable for any normal activities. Worse, the permits were ironclad, legally filed and properly approved, giving Eldridge the right to use the property as a staging area for the next 6 to 8 months. Michel arrived at noon, his Mercedes forced to park on the street because the driveway was blocked by stacks of building materials. His face was red with rage as he stormed toward Edgar. You signed the permits, Michel said without preamble. The bank called. The construction loan you co-signed has been activated, and they need immediate access to the property for the renovation project. What construction loan? Edgar demanded. Michel's confident expression faltered. The loan you co-signed 3 months ago, for the garage renovation and guest house expansion. I never signed any. Edgar stopped mid-sentence as the truth hit him. The papers Michel had brought him, the ones he'd signed in a hurry. They hadn't been loan documents for Michel's business. They'd been construction permits and financial guarantees for a renovation project that didn't exist. You son of a bitch, Edgar whispered. But Michel wasn't listening. He was staring at something beyond Edgar's shoulder, his face going white. Following his gaze, Edgar turned to see a familiar figure standing beside the construction crane. Eldridge Williamson smiled and waved. Gentlemen, Eldridge called out, walking toward them with casual confidence. I hope you're enjoying the delivery. I wanted to make sure you received everything in good condition. You can't do this, Michel sputtered. This is illegal. It's harassment. Actually, it's completely legal, Eldridge replied. Your father-in-law signed all the necessary permits. The construction loan he co-signed provides me with full access to the property for the duration of the project. Edgar's voice was barely a whisper. What do you want? I want you to understand something, Eldridge said, his smile never wavering. Yesterday, you thought you could humiliate me in front of your family and friends. You thought you could steal my property and hand it to your daughter and her boyfriend. You thought I would just accept it and walk away. He gestured to the chaos surrounding them. This is me not walking away. Louise appeared at Edgar's side, her face streaked with tears. Eldridge, please. This is madness. We can work this out. We could have worked it out, Eldridge agreed. Before yesterday. Before you chose them over me. His voice hardened. Before you forgot that I'm not the same man you met 6 years ago. I'm something much more dangerous now. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Michel, you might want to check your rental apartment. I think you'll find the locks have been changed. As Eldridge walked away, Edgar felt something crack inside his chest. The well-ordered world he'd built, the careful plans he'd made, the family legacy he'd tried to protect, all of it was crumbling around him. And they hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. Chapter 6, The Trap Springs. The eviction notice arrived at Michel's River North apartment on a Tuesday morning, served by a process server who found him in his bathrobe, frantically searching for clean clothes. The lock change had been just the beginning. Eldridge had used his ownership of the building to make Michel's life a living hell. 30 days, the process server said, handing over the legal documents. Buildings being converted to condominiums. Michel stared at the notice, his hands shaking with rage. The apartment had been his sanctuary, his private space away from the prying eyes of Chicago society. Now, it was being torn away, just like everything else. But the eviction was merely one piece of a larger puzzle that Eldridge had been assembling for months. At Chicago First National, Michel discovered that his position as senior loan officer was under review following irregularities in several high-profile accounts. The irregularities weren't fabricated. They were real problems that Michel had been sloppy enough to create through his arrogance and lack of attention to detail. The Patterson account shows 3 unauthorized extensions, his supervisor, Aubrey Hull, explained during their meeting. The Morrison loan has documentation gaps, and the Williamson construction permits. Aubrey shook his head. Jesus, Michel, what were you thinking? Michel's blood ran cold. What about the Williamson permits? You processed them personally. Construction permits for a project that turns out to be financially backed by the same man whose property was involved in the original permit application. It looks like Aubrey searched for the right words. It looks like fraud, Michel, or at minimum, gross negligence. The truth was more complex. Eldridge had legally purchased Edgar's debt when the older man defaulted on the construction loan, a default that occurred when Edgar realized he'd been tricked into signing documents he didn't understand. As the new creditor, Eldridge had every right to foreclose on the estate and use it as collateral for his own projects. Michel had processed the paperwork without realizing he was facilitating his own destruction. That evening, Michel drove to Courtney's temporary apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in Lincoln Park that was a far cry from the luxury she'd grown accustomed to. She was 8 months pregnant now, her belly prominent, her face puffy with stress and tears. "They're saying you might lose your job," she said without preamble when he walked through the door. "It's a misunderstanding. I can fix this." "With what money?" Courtney's voice rose to near hysteria. "The apartment is gone. Your job is in jeopardy, and my father won't return my calls because his house looks like a construction site." Michel tried to take her in his arms, but she pulled away. "This was supposed to be easy, Michel. You said Eldridge was just a blue-collar nobody who got lucky. You said your family's connections would protect us. They will. My father still has influence. Your father hasn't returned your calls in 2 weeks." Courtney's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Face it, Michel. We're losing." That night, alone in his hotel room, Michel made a decision that would prove to be his final mistake. He called Nestor Drake, a private investigator who specialized in the kind of work that respectable people didn't discuss in polite company. "I need you to find something on Eldridge Williamson," Michel said. "Something that will destroy him. Price is no object." Nestor, a thin man with pale eyes and a reputation for getting results through any means necessary, listened carefully to Michel's requirements. "That kind of investigation requires creative methods. Not everything will be admissible in court." "I don't care about court," Michel replied. "I just want him destroyed." What Michel didn't know was that Nestor Drake had been on Eldridge's payroll for the past 6 months. Every conversation, every plan, every desperate scheme was being recorded and reported back to the man they were trying to destroy. The trap was closing, and Michel had just walked into the final snare. 3 days later, Eldridge received a phone call that made him smile with genuine pleasure. "It's done," Jonah Riggs said. "Pittman just hired Drake to investigate you." The conversation was recorded from start to finish. Did he take the bait about the illegal surveillance? Hook, line, and sinker. He authorized Drake to break into your office, hack your computers, and photograph your personal documents. All clearly documented. Eldridge leaned back in his chair, savoring the moment. And the other matter? Courtney's medical records show stress-related complications. The doctor is recommending bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. The pieces were falling into place perfectly. Soon, Michel and Courtney would discover that their attempt to destroy Eldridge had instead provided him with everything he needed to destroy them legally, financially, and socially. But Eldridge's plan went deeper than simple revenge. He was about to teach them that some games have no winners, only survivors. Chapter 7. The Reckoning Begins. The first domino fell on a Friday morning when FBI agents arrested Michel Pittman at his office. The charges were federal: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, attempted industrial espionage, and violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. The evidence was overwhelming. Hidden cameras in Eldridge's office had captured Michel's hired investigator, Nestor Drake, attempting to install surveillance equipment. Wiretaps, legally obtained through federal court orders, had recorded dozens of conversations in which Michelle explicitly authorized illegal activities. But the masterstroke was Eldridge's manipulation of the electronic evidence. For months, he'd been feeding false information through channels he knew Michelle was monitoring. Financial records showing hidden offshore accounts, business documents detailing fictional illegal activities, and communications that painted him as a corrupt businessman willing to break any law for profit. Michelle had taken the bait eagerly, directing Drake to steal these fabricated documents as evidence of Eldridge's corruption. In doing so, he committed multiple federal crimes while pursuing evidence that would have been worthless in court. The irony is beautiful, Sherman Robles explained to Eldridge as they watched news coverage of Michelle's arrest. He destroyed himself trying to destroy you with evidence you created specifically for that purpose. Courtney's reaction was swift and predictable. She arrived at Eldridge's downtown office that afternoon, her face streaked with tears, her pregnant belly making her movements awkward and desperate. "Please," she begged, bursting past his secretary without announcement. "I know you're behind this. Michelle might have made mistakes, but this is destroying our family." Eldridge looked up from his desk, his expression calm and unmoved. "Your family was destroyed the moment you decided to betray mine. The baby is innocent in all this. The baby isn't mine." His voice was ice-cold fact. "And even if it were, you made your choice 14 months ago when you decided my love wasn't enough." Courtney collapsed into the chair across from his desk, her sobs echoing through the office. "What do you want? Money? I'll sign over everything from the divorce settlement. Just make this stop. I don't want your money, Courtney. I want you to understand what it feels like to lose everything you thought was secure." Eldridge stood and moved to the window, his back to her. "You and Michelle thought you were so clever, taking my property, humiliating me in front of my family, treating me like some temporary inconvenience to be swept aside." He turned to face her, and she flinched at what she saw in his eyes. "You forgot that I built everything I have from nothing. I know how to tear things down just as efficiently as I build them up. This isn't just about me anymore," Courtney said desperately. "My father's lost his house, his reputation, his standing in the community. My mother had a heart attack from the stress. You're destroying innocent people." "Innocent?" Eldridge's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Your father knew about the affair for 6 months and said nothing. He conspired to steal my property and hand it to you and your boyfriend. He chose his side, Courtney, just like you did. And what about forgiveness? What about the man I married who believed in second chances? That man died the day I discovered your betrayal." Eldridge returned to his desk, dismissing her with his indifference. "You can show yourself out." That evening, Eldridge sat in his sparse apartment, reading news coverage of the scandal that was consuming Chicago's social circles. Michelle's arrest had made the front page of both major newspapers, complete with photos of him being led away in handcuffs. But the real damage was just beginning. The investigation into Michelle's affairs had uncovered a web of financial improprieties at Chicago First National. Loans approved without proper documentation, investment advice given based on insider information, and a pattern of ethical violations that painted the entire Pittman family in an unfavorable light. Michelle's father, Judge Harrison Pittman, announced his early retirement from the federal bench pending an ethics investigation. His grandfather's name was being removed from the charitable foundation that had been the family's pride for 3 generations. The Pittman legacy, built over a century of careful reputation management and strategic political connections, was crumbling in real time. And Eldridge wasn't finished. His phone rang at 11:47 p.m. The caller ID showed Edgar Williamson's number. "You've made your point." Edgar's voice was hollow, defeated. "What more do you want?" "I want you to admit what you did." "I know what I did. I chose my daughter over—" "No," Eldridge interrupted. "You chose wealth and status over integrity. You chose what you thought was easy over what you knew was right. You chose to believe that I was weak enough to accept being stabbed in the back by my own family." The line was quiet for a long moment. When Edgar spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "What can I do to make this right?" "Nothing," Eldridge replied. "You can't unmake the choices you've made. just like I can't unmake mine. He hung up and returned to his reading. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new consequences for the people who'd thought they could destroy him without facing any repercussions. But tonight, for the first time in months, Eldridge Williamson slept peacefully. Chapter 8. Aftermath and Consequences. 6 weeks later, the full scope of Eldridge's revenge had become clear to everyone involved. Michelle Pittman pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and was sentenced to 4 years in minimum security prison. His conviction triggered a cascade of consequences that reached far beyond his personal situation. Chicago First National faced federal investigation and massive civil lawsuits. The bank stock price plummeted 40% in 3 days, wiping out millions in shareholder value. 3 senior executives, including Michelle's direct supervisor, resigned in disgrace. The Pittman family's social standing collapsed entirely. Judge Harrison Pittman's early retirement became permanent disgrace when ethics investigators discovered he'd used his position to facilitate several of his son's questionable business deals. The family estate in Lake Forest went up for auction to pay legal fees and civil judgments. But it was Edgar and Louise Williamson who bore the heaviest burden of Eldridge's methodical destruction. The construction loan Edgar had unknowingly co-signed contained acceleration clauses that triggered when Michelle's criminal conviction became final. Eldridge, as the legal holder of the debt, demanded immediate payment of the full amount, $2.3 million, plus accumulated interest and penalties. Edgar's attorney, Dana LeBlanc, tried desperately to negotiate a settlement. Mr. Williamson, your client's demands are excessive. My client was clearly deceived about the nature of the documents he signed. Your client signed legal documents without reading them, Sherman Robles replied coolly. His financial incompetence doesn't void his legal obligations. The Winnetka estate, Edgar's family home for 37 years, was seized to satisfy the debt. Louise's 20-year garden was bulldozed to make way for a luxury development project that Eldridge designed personally. The new townhomes will be marketed as Williamson Commons. Louise's heart attack, brought on by the stress of losing her home, required emergency surgery and months of recovery. Medical bills consumed what little savings they had left after the foreclosure. Edgar, once a proud pillar of Chicago society, now lived in a modest apartment in Schaumburg and worked as a part-time consultant for a property management company. The chess set they'd shared for years sat and used in a box in his closet, too painful a reminder of better times. Courtney's situation was perhaps the most tragic. 9 months pregnant and facing financial ruin, she moved back to her childhood bedroom in the apartment her parents rented after losing their home. The stress of the scandal triggered early labor complications that required an emergency C-section. The baby, a girl she named Hope, was born healthy but immediately became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Michel couldn't be present for the birth. He was already serving his federal sentence. The child's birth certificate listed only Courtney as the parent. I've lost everything, Courtney confessed to her mother as they sat in the cramped apartment, surrounded by moving boxes and unpaid bills. My marriage, my home, my family's reputation, my future, all because I made one terrible mistake. Several terrible mistakes. Louise corrected gently but firmly. And not just you. We all made choices that led us here. Courtney's financial situation was dire. The divorce settlement money had been spent on legal fees and medical bills. The lakefront cottage she'd received was underwater on its mortgage due to declining property values, a decline that wasn't accidental but the result of Eldridge purchasing and demolishing 3 neighboring properties, destroying the area's appeal to luxury buyers. She applied for assistance programs she'd never imagined needing. Food stamps, Medicaid, subsidized housing, the safety net that caught people when they fell from grace. The social fall was equally devastating. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Country club memberships were quietly revoked. Invitations to charity galas and social events stopped arriving. Courtney Williamson, who had once been featured in Chicago magazines, Rising Stars Under 40, was now a cautionary tale whispered about in the same social circles that had once celebrated her. But Eldridge's revenge extended beyond financial and social destruction. He'd systematically dismantled every relationship, every connection, every source of support that his enemies had relied upon. Boyd Williamson, Edgar's younger son and Eldridge's former brother-in-law, discovered that his law practice was losing clients after word spread about the family's connection to the scandal. His partnership at a prestigious downtown firm was quietly dissolved. The ripple effects continued expanding, touching everyone who had chosen sides against Eldridge or remained silent when they should have spoken up. Only Jonah Riggs, the private investigator who had started this chain of events with his manila folder, remained untouched. He'd been paid handsomely for his work and had wisely invested the money in properties that Eldridge didn't control. "You got your revenge," Jonah observed during their final meeting. "The question is, was it worth it?" Eldridge considered the question seriously. His former life was gone completely. The marriage, the family connections, the social relationships that had defined his identity for 6 years. But something new had taken their place. "Ask me in 5 years," he replied. Chapter 9. The Last Smile. 1 year later, Eldridge stood in the penthouse of his newest building, a 40-story tower that dominated the Chicago skyline. The view from his office encompassed the entire city, including the neighborhoods where his former enemies now struggled to rebuild their shattered lives. The construction of Williamson Commons had been completed 6 months ahead of schedule. The luxury townhomes sold within days of going on the market, generating profits that exceeded even Eldridge's aggressive projections. Where Edgar's family estate once stood, young professionals now paid premium prices to live in what had become one of Chicago's most desirable addresses. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the history. Eldridge's business empire had grown exponentially during the year of his revenge. The chaos he'd created in his personal life had somehow focused his professional energy with laser precision. 3 major developments, 2 hotel acquisitions, and a commercial real estate portfolio that doubled in value. Success, it turned out, was indeed the best revenge. His secretary announced a visitor, Sherman Robles, the attorney who had helped orchestrate much of the legal maneuvering that made the revenge possible. "I have news about the Pittman situation," Sherman said, settling into the chair across from Eldridge's massive desk. Michelle's appealing his sentence. His new attorney thinks they can get it reduced based on mental health factors. "Let them try," Eldridge replied without looking up from his documents. The evidence was overwhelming, and federal judges don't like defendants who commit crimes against the same people trying to help them. "There's something else." Sherman hesitated. "Courtney's filed for bankruptcy. She's also applied for permission to change the baby's last name from Pittman to Cunningham, her maiden name." This got Eldridge's attention. Trying to distance herself from Michelle's conviction, trying to distance her daughter from the whole mess. The kid's going to grow up with enough baggage without carrying the Pittman name. Eldridge returned to his paperwork, but Sherman wasn't finished. "Edgar's been asking about you, through intermediaries. He wants to know if there's any possibility of reconciliation." "No." "He's willing to admit his mistakes publicly. Make a formal apology. Whatever you want. I want him to live with the consequences of his choices," Eldridge said flatly. "Just like I live with mine." Sherman studied his client carefully. "You know, there are people who think you went too far, that your revenge was disproportionate to the offense." Eldridge finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting Sherman's. "Those people have never been betrayed by everyone they trusted. They've never discovered that their marriage was a lie, their family was fake, and their love was just another asset to be divided in a settlement. And now I know exactly where I stand with everyone in my life." Eldridge gestured toward the cityscape beyond his windows. "These buildings don't lie to me. These contracts don't cheat on me. This money doesn't pretend to love me while planning to destroy me." Sherman gathered his papers, recognizing the dismissal in Eldridge's tone. "For what it's worth, I think you won. Completely and absolutely." After Sherman left, Eldridge remained at his desk as the sun set over Chicago. His phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 unread messages. investors, contractors, politicians, and society figures who wanted something from a man who'd become one of the city's most powerful real estate developers. But there were no personal calls, no family messages, no friends checking in just to say hello. That evening, he drove to a small cemetery in suburban Oak Park where his mother was buried. She died when he was 24, before he'd become wealthy, before he'd met Courtney, before everything had gone so spectacularly wrong. "I kept my promise," he said to the weathered headstone. "I built something that mattered, something that lasted." He paused, thinking about everything that had happened. "I just didn't realize how much it would cost." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the oak tree that shaded her grave. In the distance, the lights of Chicago twinkled like stars, each one representing someone's hopes, dreams, and struggles. Eldridge's phone buzzed with another message. Another opportunity, another deal, another chance to add to his empire. He ignored it. For the first time in years, he had nothing urgent to do and nowhere important to be. The revenge was complete. His enemies were destroyed. His empire was secure. So why did he feel so empty? The answer came to him as he walked back to his car. Victory without witnesses was meaningless. Revenge without the possibility of redemption was hollow. Power without love was just expensive loneliness. But these were philosophical concerns for another day. Tonight, Eldridge Williamson would return to his penthouse, pour himself an expensive drink, and plan his next conquest. Because building empires was what he did now, the only thing he had left to do. In another part of the city, Courtney sat in her cramped apartment, holding her sleeping daughter and wondering what kind of future awaited a child born from such destruction. Edgar stared at his chessboard, unable to focus on the game that had once brought him joy. Michelle counted days in a federal prison, dreaming of redemption that might never come. They were all casualties of a war that had no winners, only survivors. And in his glass tower above the city, Eldridge Williamson smiled his last smile. Not because he was happy, but because happiness was a luxury he could no longer afford. He had chosen power over